Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Here is yet another Groovy Podcast live from the G3 Summit in Austin, Texas. This time I'm joined with the ever popular Paul King, one of the core team members. I'd say you could argue that you're probably one of the leaders of the Groovy framework. I mean, if not by formal title, then certainly by number of commits. Are you number one in the number of commits now again? I mean, Cedric passed you briefly. No, he never did?
No, he was catching close. He was catching, but yeah, Pivotal moved on before that happened. So.
Yeah, when Cedric Champeau was at Pivotal, he was doing a lot of commits on the Groovy framework, but now he's at Gradle, and they have different priorities, we'll say, you know.
Yeah.
But now Paul has always been very active and very dedicated in the Groovy framework. I know you are now the second author on Groovy in Action. I think could have argued that, you know, you probably deserve prime placement there, but again, that's just, you know, it is what it is. No problem.
Dirk and I'll have a little rock, paper, scissors or something next time we see each other or something.
Exactly. And, you know, he'll owe you the cup of coffee from the royalties from last, you know.
Yeah, we've got to save up a few royalty payments to get that cup of coffee, but we'll get there. Yeah.
How's the book doing, by the way?
Not too bad. Yeah. Good. It's still doing reasonably well. It seems to go in spurts. So, you know, after a conference like this, probably a few more get brought up, see what happens.
The first edition of that book is still my all-time favorite technical book. I absolutely love that book. And the second edition, I like what I've read out of it. It's just that I haven't gone through and read the whole thing again. You know, I mean, probably should do that periodically. I remember in the first edition of the book, as I was getting more experience with Groovy, I would figure something out, and then I'd go, you know, I wonder if this is a Groovy in Action. And of course, it was all laid out in there, you know.
Yeah.
But I guess that's how you learn. Any rate, we are at the G3 Summit, and yesterday evening, you had one of the two keynotes. Graham Roche did the keynote for Grails, but you represented Groovy. Guillaume Laforge is not here this week. I think he was committed to another conference somewhere in Eastern
He's there today, I believe. Now, in theory, I think he could have been here for the first, 6 hours or something.
Yeah,
he had to hop on a flight, so it just wasn't worth.
Hop on one of a series of flights.
Yes,
as I recall. It really would have been difficult to get where he's going. Yeah. But I found it very interesting. So you did a lot of discussions about what's going on in Groovy right now, what's going on in the future, how the whole thing is set up. So if you don't mind, I want to start with the discussion of version numbering.
Okay.
Because this has been very unusual for my experience in the Groovy ecosystem. At the moment, the current release version is 2.13.
Yes.
Yep, I updated, so that's all working. But we also have 2.5 versions, which are, I think, in beta now. We have a 2.6 version in alpha, and we have a 3.0 version in alpha. Yeah. So can you kind of clarify what are all three of those about? What's the real plan here? What's changing? We'll get into the details of the changes themselves shortly, but just what about the version numbers?
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated when you first see it, and that's understandable. If things had been different, we probably would have had 2.5 out by now, and part of the strange set of numbers would be gone. But basically, 2.5 is our next release, and it has things like macros in there. It has a whole bunch of. Well, we're going to come back and talk about some of those,
sure.
I guess. Has a whole bunch of additional AST transformations and enhancements to the current transformations, and a few other tool support things. So it's got all those, and if we had all that stuff finished, it would be out and people would be using it. But it's been a little bit slower in recent times getting everything finished. I've been testing the 2.5 extensively with things like Spark and things like Grails, and a few little hiccups are there, and often we'd fix those, and we'd push stuff out, and when we had bugs were found, we'd then do the 2.5.1, 2.5.2, but there hasn't been a sort of a huge pressure on us to get 2.5 out. So I've been trying to get all those fixes embedded in 2.5.0. So you obviously won't capture everything, but things like Spock and Grails are very important in the Groovy ecosystem, so we might as well get them right as best we can, and then we'll progress stuff. So that's one of the things that we've delayed a little bit, hardening up parts of the things that we've done improvements to things like the type inference system and the final variable analysis and other things like that. They're all not really visible to most people, but because we've tried to make them a little bit more powerful, they go and check more stuff. And what that means is if we've been a little bit lapse in our early versions of our type checking, and people are writing code that is a bit lapsed, and if you turn all these checks on, stuff starts it starts warning you a bit more about those sorts of things. And we didn't want it to be the point that it's going to be so annoying to people that they're going to get turned off. So we've done a lot of work finessing how all that occurs and made improvements into that. So that's part of it. The other thing is that one of the things, the macros and macro method features that are there, they're very powerful features, and they kind of give you like global functions that you can do various things with. And whenever you do something that's global, that's a potential warning sign that this is a very powerful thing, and could I be stomping on other people's feet if I go in to find a null safe method or whatever? If someone has already got a null safe method, what's going to happen, and so on. So there's just been various discussions going on about that, about do we like the design as it is now, or do we need some sort of mechanism so that it's not as global as it, is not going to bite people in the bum basically when they start using this stuff. So they're the two things that we've been trying to get right that have been taking a bit of time, and so we've had delays. So that's 2.5, and we might come back and talk about some of that.
Sure.
Then normally what would happen is we'd then jump to 3, because what we've done is we've got a brand new parser, the Parrot parser, that we'll come back and talk about. And that would be the next release that we had, and it wouldn't look too normal because we probably wouldn't have any releases of 3 yet. It would just be the master branch, and once we got 2.5 out, then we'd start talking about 3, and everyone would be fine. But because the new parser's there, it's going to actually impact tool support. So we need IntelliJ and Eclipse people to support the new features we've put in the new parser. So that takes time. And we've got lots of projects now in the Groovy ecosystem. So we've got the Spocks, we've got Grails, we've got Jeb, and all these projects that are using Groovy syntax. Does the new features, we've turned stuff on, we've turned stuff off, we've fixed stuff up. Is any of that going to impact any of those projects? So we wanted to start getting that feedback about the new features, and that's why we put some alphas out to get the ball rolling with those features, because we've asked people for feedback and haven't got very much yet. And it's not until we put a release out that people start to scream up and down and say, "You've broken Spock. What do you think you're doing? Go and fix that." And so we've got the alphas out there now. We're starting to get the feedback that we want, and that's why we've stretched things out in that direction.
That's 3.0.
That's 3.0.
Okay.
And even that, so that would normally not be too much of a stretch, having a couple of versions that an impending one and a future one.
Right.
Then what's happened is that some people have said, "Hey, I really love all this new Parrot parser stuff that you're putting in there, but I'm stuck on a JDK 7. Can you somehow help me?" 2.6 was introduced as, look, we're just going to take 3, we're going to backport it to JDK 7, and anything that breaks, we'll just switch off and we'll give you a warning or something. No new features, nothing else. It's just a backported 3, and that's going to be it until you can get fully over onto JDK.
I mean, the big feature of the Parrot parser is it supports all the Java 8 syntax, right?
Correct.
The lambdas, method reference, all that.
Yes.
And you're saying that you still introduce that with the parser, but still have it work on 1.7.
Correct. And that's, there's some interesting discussion points about how you do that.
Yeah.
So we can support lambdas by making them closures. We can support interface default methods by making them traits. We can support,
right.
and we can do all of that in JDK7 land. So all this stuff that you see in Java 8, if you're still stuck on Java 7, we can give it all to you. But you know, at the same time, we might want to support native lambdas and other things as well. So how do we? What's the best path that's going to keep everybody happy and move us forward? And so there's been a lot of things to get right, and then. So that's why there's 2.6. And so 2.6 people should just ignore unless you're definitely stuck on JDK7 and you need these new features. We expect not to have the huge downloads on that version of Groovy compared to others, but we've got some important users. So Gradle itself has is a potential candidate for using 2.6 if they want to use some of the new features, want to support a better Gradle DSL with Groovy in the future, for instance. 2.6 might be a nice candidate for them because they might not have moved on to JDK8 yet.
Yeah, many Java projects in the industry are going through that debate now of when to require a minimum JDK of 1.8. Spring Framework just did that with Spring 5. Well, the Hibernate people are discussing it.
They're all moving.
Right.
And 2.6 is just an interim measure because we know there's going to be people who haven't moved yet and we want to give them a place to stay safely until such time as they can.
Okay, so the expected path is most people will go to 2.5 once it's released.
Correct.
And then eventually to 3.
A year later, they'll jump on to 3.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And if they need to, then they've got a way station 2.6. But hopefully 2.6 is just an interim because the underlying infrastructure is the one that's changing.
That's right. Yeah.
It's the Java part that's changing all that. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
So the only other spanner that's in the works is while we were doing all of this, the whole Java 9 modules.
That was my next question.
That situation came about, which also delayed when we'd have 3 out and stuff like that as well, because so at the moment you can run Groovy 2.4 all the way up to Java on JDK 10.
Oh, okay.
And it runs fine, but it gives you these annoying warning messages, and people are running Groovy in production on probably not Java 10 yet, but some of them are looking at Java 9. And maybe it's not production, but they're looking at it and they get this warning message saying, please go and file a bug report against this project. And there's no bug inside the Groovy code at all. There's no, it's a benign warning in the sense of their prod code is not at any risk if they execute it. And if they've got some Groovy code and execute it on JDK 9, it'll do exactly the same, exactly what they intended it to do, what it was doing on JDK 8. The warning's all about, at some point in the future, maybe JDK 10, maybe JDK 11, some feature will be turned off that we're making use of.
Okay.
And Oracle's being a little bit putting their foot down a little bit, saying, "Hey, you better get off those features because we really want to lock those away at some point in time." And so these warning messages are coming up, and that's what that's all about. So it's kind of, yes, it'd be nice not to have the warning messages now, but we've got to progress that stuff forward, and there's quite a few things to work through. So.
As part of that process, are you planning to modularize the Groovy JDK or the Groovy libraries the way the JDK has been modularized for 9?
So that's all part of the discussion around that, and we know there's certain things that we know already. So you can go and use JDK 9 and put Groovy in your class path, and apart from these warning messages, everything's going to be fine. If you wanted to put Groovy onto your module path in the Java 9 land, it's not going to know what the hell it is. It's not a module.
Right.
So in the first instance, you'd expect to have maybe a fat Groovy jar or whatever sitting over in module land that people can use. And so we've committed to that we'll at least be supporting that. And there's even question marks on what that would look like, so that when going further, if we have fine-grained modules as well, you don't want to take a first step that's not what you'd want once the fine-grained modules are there. So there's still a little bit of debate going on about that, and there's work to do to make all that happen. But that's the first instance. We're going to be supporting that, and then part of the alpha process with 3 is to sort out the other things that we're going to commit to.
That unnamed module system, or the automatic module system, that was what made Jigsaw so controversial anyway. How are we going to handle all that? I remember there's a thing in there in Java 9 where you can reserve a name, because otherwise, if you don't reserve a name, it becomes the name of the jar file, which is going to change over time.
Yeah, yeah.
So these are all things that are being discussed now.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So we haven't bothered putting that in just yet, and until you've finalised your direction, if you're a small single jar file that's always ever going to be, it's going to be a single jar. There's a single dependency that gets added. You can make that call fairly easily, and you can do that up front. It's not going to be controversial. If you're a library that might have fine-grained modules, and do we have, can you write a module in Groovy? So there's a module info.java file in Java 9. Can you have a module info.groovy file?
Right.
Which version is that going to be supported in? And so there's a few more things that something like Groovy needs to sort through versus.
Just glad I'm not making those decisions. That's a lot of stuff to debate. So now, and 2.5 will not use the parrot parser, though, right? So it's not using the new parser.
Correct.
But despite that, it's going to have a whole bunch of new features.
Yes.
Right. So do you want to talk about some of those features that are coming? Now, by the way, before we do that, do you have a rough time frame of when you expect 2.5? I mean, are you going to go through? I mean, right now we've got an alpha and a beta. Are there going to be release candidates and then a release? Are there going to be milestones? Do you have any idea how many roughly to expect? I'm looking for a time frame roughly.
Yeah. So I'd expect to probably one more beta. I'm thinking.
Okay.
If I can get all the features, if I can make it feature complete in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, really? We're that close to being feature complete? That's something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then we'll do a release candidate.
Oh.
Release candidate 1. And I'm not expecting to have a huge number of release candidates. So I'm only expecting to have 2 or 3 release candidates. So it could be as early as early next year. Probably it's likely to be first quarter next year.
So January, February, but maybe
it could be. Well, if I have to commit, I'll say first half of next year.
Right.
We'll have 2.5 out. But it may be much earlier if there's. So at the moment, I'm not keen on having releases out there that break Spark and break Grails.
Right.
So, but I'm very close to having all the main things sorted, I believe. And there's only one other. There's the question on the global macro thing that's still a question mark over. And I'll be writing a couple of extra macros and things, testing out some stuff that I'm wanting to do in that space. And there's one other thing that I've got in mind that I think is worth adding, but I won't commit to it just yet because I don't know if I'll get time. And then we're done. There's nothing else that we're targeting for 2.5.
So let's talk about those macro methods. Now, on the podcast, we actually talked to Sergey Egorov.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Months ago. A while ago. And I'm waiting for the jokes to come pouring in about, we haven't had podcasts for months, but whatever. We talked to him.
I'll get onto that for you.
Yeah, exactly. And he tried to explain it to me, and I sort of got it, but not really got it. What it looked like was it felt like you were writing code that writes code. It looked like, generating code again, like AST transforms or things like that. What are macro methods all about?
Well, so let's tease it apart and split out the different bits. First of all, there's if you like, there's a new global method called macro.
Okay.
And it's basically a global transform, if you like, and it's like a global method. Okay. And again, that's one of the debates: do we make it global, or do we put a little hook in there to make it obvious that you've got something like that in play in a particular file? But anyway. So if I put macro and then I put a chunk of Groovy code in there, it actually converts all that Groovy code to the same thing the compiler would convert it to. So I'm actually, by putting the little macro annotation there, I'm jumping from Groovy land into compiler land. So the compiler deals with an abstract syntax tree representing your program. So it's got things, class nodes, and inside your class you've got method nodes, and a method. One method might have parameters and some code.
That's what you see with the AST browser.
The AST browser, yeah. So if I just go macro and put in any Groovy code, magically that's turned into an expression or a statement or a class that represents, it's all the things that the compiler sees. So it's the class node and the method nodes and all those.
So
things.
it's just like an AST transform, but it's happening at runtime? Is that the idea? I mean, I'm trying to figure out, why would you do this rather than just write the code and compile it, you know?
So if I want to go and write the two-string transform,
Okay.
Traditionally what I would do is go and say, I'm implementing a particular interface, so I'm a transform.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a visit method. I'm going to put something inside the visit method that transforms the AST.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I would do is, you've given me a class. I'm going to add a new method called toString to that class.
Right.
And then I'd do a for loop. So I'd create a new method node
Right.
for toString, and I'd say it's a public static whatever. And then I would say, I'd go and so I'm using all these data structures that are in AST land.
Right.
Now what I can do is just go macro and go print line, A plus B or whatever I want to put as.
But if you're going to do that, why not just write the two in your class?
No,
what am I missing? I'm missing something else.
As a user of the two-string annotation, you're just going to use it exactly the way you used it before. You won't see macro of the two-string.
Oh.
And now I can use just Groovy code when I'm writing it.
You don't have to get down into the low-level details of how to manipulate the AST.
So the transform makes the Groovy user life happy. Right. Macros make the Groovy writer's life happy.
So in other words, it's not something I'm likely to use on a regular basis because I'm not really trying to modify the language. Yeah.
That's right.
So
so if I'm a transform writer, now all of a sudden I've got all the joy and bliss of, I can just put at immutable and I get all this stuff for free.
Yeah, right. I mean, which is wonderful.
Now I get all of that when I'm writing my transform.
Okay.
I don't have to do all that work anymore. I just put the code and it just gives it to you.
Because before it was all builders and extending existing classes.
So
and all that
in some ways, it's a direct replacement for AST Builder. But AST Builder had a few things that were a little bit broken. It wasn't reentrant and a few other things. This fixes all those. So it's actually just a new and improved AST Builder.
So this is really fundamentally changing the people working on the language, changing your life.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So it's in some sense if you're trying to speak to the IT layman, it's invisible to them mostly, except they will see more AST transforms in the next version of Groovy because it's now much easier to write.
Right, right. I mean, it'll open up lots of possibilities once things get simple.
And if you're a framework writer like Rails, you can write these things much more quickly.
Yeah, I've never wanted to write an AST transform myself because when you look in the AST browser at some of the existing generated methods like toString, it looks so incredibly tedious to write those things.
There's a bit of work there. I mean, it's conceptually not challenging most of the time. There's some parts of it dealing with generics and some other stuff that get hairy, but conceptually, if writing a toString method or whatever is not too hard to make it very customizable and embed all the best practices for some of these annotations. There's a little bit of thinking, but once it's there, you just work it through and you get there. But now there'll just be less code you have to write in order to do that.
All right, so that's one of the changes that's coming in 2.5.
Correct.
Okay, so
I'm sorry. That's not the whole picture. So that's such a powerful thing, having that macro and you put code there or whatever. That's done as a global transform that's going to happen whenever you're running code. And you're right, in that particular macro, you won't use very often. But what macro methods do, we probably should call them custom macros or something. We've opened that feature up so that you can go write your own. So you don't have to use macro. You can have, there's null safe or do with data or those the ones that I showed you
during the keynote.
You can write those yourself, and so you can go and write one of these global things yourself. Again,
hopefully I don't conflict with something that's already there. Or whatever.
Well, that's why we're sorting that out.
It's the same concern you have with runtime metaprogramming too. You don't want to conflict with something that already exists, and they start calling it monkey patching, and they're all contemptuous and all that. Exactly.
Yeah. So, but what it means is that that you can achieve some functionality much easier using that mechanism than what you would have had to do before. You'd have to go write your own global transform, and it would be inefficient if you had lots of them. And so you can just piggyback on this mechanism that we're using now for macro, and you can write your own and piggyback on that and get a whole lot of stuff for free and have a very powerful mechanism.
So like Grails has with transaction or with criteria, something like that. Is that the sort of thing that would be naturally a macro method now?
So if you're using at with transaction or whatever, and you can annotate something.
Yeah, right. That's
the AST transforms might be exactly what you want to do, and whoever write that might use macros. Mm-hmm. If you're wanting to like add a language feature where there's no annotations and no whatever,
right,
that's where these macro methods shine.
So the framework developers are going to be excited about that. So that's an intermediate level between the language developers and the users.
Yeah. So it's kind of like traits is a really powerful thing when you're going to be building lots of classes up. The macro methods is a really powerful thing for framework writers to bring a whole lot of functionality in there that can be available and so on. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So at any rate, the macro methods, that's a big change, and that's coming with 2.5.
Yes.
But there were a whole series of other changes that are also coming 2.5. Do you want to comment on any of them? Do you want to take a look at some of them? Or I mean, I know we can't show any code, but we could talk about some of them anyway.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of them, some refinements to the current existing AST transforms.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to use the nice thing about an AST transform is you get a whole lot of boilerplate code for free.
Right.
But if that boilerplate code doesn't quite do what you want,
right,
and sometimes you kind of say, oh, drats, I can't use it. I'm going to go do it all by hand.
Exactly.
Now there's a whole lot of cases, a whole lot of scenarios that you used to have to do by hand that you can now customize and combine them in better ways and so on and so forth. So there's just been a whole raft of improvements there, which will mean much less often now you really have to go and write stuff yourself.
So that'll be tweaking some of the existing AST transforms?
There's a few new ones like map constructor and so on like that.
Yeah, I noticed map constructor. I mean, I've always kind of thought of Groovy as having a map constructor anyway, or as you call it, named argument. So what will be different about having the AST transform?
Yeah, so first of all, if you're wanting to combine, so the existing way Groovy does named arguments for both methods and constructors is it'll call the no-arg method or the no-arg constructor, followed by setters, basically.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. Boy, a light bulb went off the first time I hit that. So
yeah. And it all happens under the covers, so you don't even need to worry that that's what's happening.
Right.
But what if I want to put final fields inside my class?
Oh, then I got a problem.
Yeah, because I'm calling the no-arg constructor. It sets everything to null or whatever, and then I'm going to call my setters, and it's going to say, no, you can't call that. It's a final thing. Mm-hmm. And so there's times when you'd like to have the named argument looking style, but you want to have final or whatever, or you want to combine. You've got a tuple constructor there and no-arg constructor. Or you
now you got a problem.
Yeah. Or you can't have a no-arg constructor because you want to do dependency injection and you need something like this. So there's a whole lot of cases that crop up, and in the past you would have had to say, oh, okay, I can't use all this fancy stuff. I'm going to have to go back and write stuff myself by hand. Now by mixing tuple and map and various switches on them, you can get a whole range of those scenarios covered and get everything generated for free.
That also probably puts the map constructor in the bytecode so you can call it from Java too.
Correct. If you need to do Java integration, that's another scenario.
Okay.
It's a very useful thing to have.
So any other new AST transforms that look interesting?
There's a couple more. There's an auto implement and auto final and things like that.
Yes.
Auto final is probably a one that's easy to explain. So a lot of people, there's always been a debate over should I put final everywhere from all my parameters.
The people do immutable everything. You can always tell somebody who's worked with or written about concurrency because they wind up scattering final throughout their code. They don't want you to override anything. They don't want you to change anything. Yeah. So this is a step toward immutable objects, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, slightly contentious thing whether you put finals everywhere or not.
Yeah, I never liked it myself.
Well, we had this debate in many of the agile teams that I used to work with, and on the plus side, putting final everywhere sort of locks everything down, and what have you. But then do you do it in your test methods as well? And then do you do it, so it just, once you open the can of worms, you have to do it absolutely everywhere. And what about it?
I mean, if you want to code in Kotlin, go ahead and code in Kotlin. And look what problems that enters them into, right? And they had to have Spring go in and open up all those Kotlin classes because you can't generate a proxy because you couldn't override anything. So I mean, I get final variables, but final methods, I mean, I don't know what usage everybody's going to make of a method I write. I prefer to have the freedom, but at least this way you could say you can apply an AST transform and therefore apply final and everybody will know it.
Yeah, well, the flip side is that hey, I'm writing test methods or whatever. I'm the only one who's ever going to be using these. Get rid of all that noise, and who cares if it's not immutable or whatever? It's only going to be used for running this one test suite and what have you. The nice thing about auto final is that it can put a convention like that in place across the whole whole class or whatever it might be, what level that you want to apply it on, but without all the noise.
So that goes both on methods and on the class, and on attributes, I assume as well, or not. I'm not sure what that would even mean.
You can put it on closures, and it'll actually put final on all the closures parameter methods.
Closures? Put it on a closure?
If you've got a field that points to a closure, for instance, in your class, then you can just make that final, and all of a sudden all the parameters on the closure will be final as well.
That's different. I mean, I remember in Grails years ago, all the controller actions were closures. They weren't methods yet. And that ran into the problem of the AOP stuff, that you couldn't wrap a transaction around a field because Spring only dealt with, it would only advise methods, I mean, Aspect J could, but Spring didn't do that. So they had to go to methods, if I remember it correctly. But now you're saying if you put auto final on a field that's assigned to a closure, it makes the parameters of the closure final.
Correct.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
So anyway, and we could extend that to other things if we wanted to, but at the moment it does class level, method level, and that particular case as well.
Wow. So any other ones that you wanted to comment on? Or should we go on to other features, whatever you like?
Yeah, we can go on to other features. There's some slight improvements to Groovy Shell. There's some improvements to some other tooling, things like documentation. So in current versions of Groovy, when you're running Groovy doc and things like that, the current parser throws away all comments and stuff like that.
Right.
Whereas now, actually that part's in the parrot parser, but there's some documentation improvements in 2.5 and then more in parrot. So yeah, that part's actually.
Well, let's start moving to the parrot parser then, and all the new features that are going to be out there in 3, right?
Yes.
And 2.6 for the people who can't do 3 or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
So what do you want to start with on that?
Well, the first thing was, so Groovy's always tried to provide sort of parity with Java.
Right.
We want to have all the things that Java's got plus the bonus, bells and whistles.
Right.
And with some things that we just never supported, like do while loop.
That cracks me up. I always, whenever I'm teaching a Groovy class, I always say, you could take 90% of Java files and rename them .groovy. This is before Java 8 came along, of course, and it would automatically compile without a problem. And I said, you know what the giant exception to that is? And I would point out the do while loop, which I always thought was really funny that that's where they drew the line. Now I get it. It's because you've got do with a closure, and what are you going to do with that? But now at long last, you've got do while loops in Groovy. I can't think of the last time I wrote one, but okay.
Yeah, that's right. So, in fact, that's actually one of the. If you go and look up macro methods, you'll see a do while transform basically. So you can actually do while outside parrot parser as well by using the macro mechanism.
I had no idea.
Anyway, if you're wanting to look up a first macro, that's a nice one to go look at because it's intuitive what it's doing. A while loop does something until some condition. A do while does it at least once and then does it at the bottom condition. Right. So if I was going to go write that by hand, I know exactly what I'd be doing and go look at the macro and lo and behold, it does exactly the way you do it by hand.
That's funny. And it transforms it so that it's basically a while loop.
It is a while loop
that runs once.
Yeah. So the body is a closure, like exactly the thing that you were talking about before, and it just runs the closure once and then runs it in a while loop.
I never knew there was an AST transform for that.
It's not an AST transform; it's a macro.
That'll be part of the macro. So there isn't an existing one.
It's an example one that's not built. We haven't incorporated it into Groovy.
All right, I'm glad I didn't miss that because that would have been funny. So okay.
Yeah, but it's been there for like 2 years. So you've had 2 whiles for 2 years.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Only if you used
There's so much code I would have rewritten. Well, no, there's nothing I would have rewritten. But anyway.
And there's a few other things that fall into that same category. So the classic for loop in Java, initially we didn't even support, I don't think,
I remember that
initial one.
That's
but
right.
Then when we supported it, we kind of covered the simple cases. So normally you'll have for x equals string.size, string.length or whatever, x minus until until x is 0, x minus or whatever it's going to be. But in fact, you can put a comma in the left-hand side and the right, maybe in all three places, and we now support that as well.
So you can declare multiple variables. You can change them both in the increments. Isn't that interesting? Okay.
Yeah. So Java's always had that, and now we've just supported that as well. Again, there's nicer ways to do it in Groovy, and we'd encourage you to do it in a nicer way. But if you want to do the cut and paste from Java, or you're happy with that particular thing, then it's there.
Okay.
And there's several things like that. And in fact, array initialization is another one of the things that.
Yeah, that was always a problem because you couldn't. I mean, it looked like a closure. You couldn't use your curly braces like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
But in fact, there's many scenarios where you're always going to have a type in front of it.
Yes.
And that's the ones that we now support. So it doesn't cover all cases because Java would also let you have an array initializer over on the right-hand side without a type as long as it's typed on the left-hand side.
So that's not going to work.
That's still not supported.
But you can go new string, square bracket, braces, and fill in a bunch of strings.
And so that exact Java syntax, which is the most common, that's now supported. So just knocking off all the things, if you're coming from the Java world, that you might find a bit foreign, less of those to explain to people. So just knock all those off, and yes, we do everything. We do it all.
Right.
As part of doing that, we've actually improved multiple assignment. In Groovy, you can have round brackets with variables x, y, and equals a list or something.
Oh yeah,
right? The multi-assignment,
which you rarely see. I mean, but yeah, I remember it was a big deal when it was released.
It's basically Groovy's poor man's answer to tuples, tuple types and things. And so it's actually a very powerful mechanism. We should use it more,
right?
Because if you have any method call that might be returning a list of things, then you can just equate all the parts, and it does your deconstruction automatically as part of the assignment. So
I used to use it when I was parsing CSV data or something, and you just assign it to a list. It was really convenient. I used to use that with the Google Geocoder because you could ask for a CSV type, and you get back like the HTTP status code and something, and then latitude, longitude at the end. And you only wanted the ones at the end, and that was an easy way to do it. And then they removed that, so I stopped using it. But that was like 1.6 or something.
So that's supported, but now you can do that inside a for loop. There you go.
Okay.
So we didn't support that before. So prove that as well. So that's a nice one to have.
Okay.
Some big ticket items.
Right.
Lambda.
Right.
So Java 8 had a nice syntax that actually was getting much, much closer to Groovy's conciseness and whatever.
Right, but not the same.
But slightly different.
Yes.
And now you can use that syntax as well.
Okay.
So that's really neat. So if you're coming from the Java 8 world and you're moving into Groovy, you can bring all your Lambda skills with you and bring all that across.
Yeah, I mean, you've always been able to, or seemingly always, since Java 8 came out, you could use the methods because of course the biggest thing about Java 8 is that they don't actually have a class called Lambda, or an interface called Lambda, anything like that. So they use those functional interfaces.
Correct. That's
right. And we could always provide a closure where they expected a Lambda when you assign to a functional interface. So I've been using the API for years in Java, and what people would say to me, well, what about lazy streams? Groovy, we do, an each method right on the collection. And that in Java, you could change it to a stream and then short circuit and everything. I said, you want to do streams, just do streams. Just call dot stream and do for each, whatever, Yeah. So, but now we're actually going to have
mix and match. So, now you've
mix and match sounds dangerous, but okay.
Well, now you've got the Lambda syntax supported.
Right.
We don't at the moment emit native Lambda under the covers. When you write the Lambda expression, we just convert it to a closure under the covers.
That's funny because again, in Kotlin, they converted it to an anonymous inner class because they support Java 1.6.
Yeah. Okay.
But here we're going to convert to a closure.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So then,
and there's still ongoing debate about native Lambda support as well. So.
Okay. So that's there.
It's in the pipeline of things to.
And in 2.6, presumably they're going to have to convert to whatever 1.7 will support. But in 3.0, eventually it'll be native Lambda support.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying by 3.0 we'll have worked out what our strategy is. We may end up just going to closures and saying if you want to do a native Lambda support, you'll have to use this annotation, or you'll have to, there might be another way to get your native Lambda support. We have to finalize the design
because we don't have the effectively final like they do in Java. You can modify a variable.
That's not the issue. It's basically. So what we've done at the moment is use the syntax of Java 8,
right,
mapped it onto Groovy 7's closures.
Sure.
Now, there'll be times when a native Lambda equivalent of that syntax will be much more efficient than a closure version, because closures are got more overhead. It's a heavyweight. It's a more flexible thing, but it's a more heavyweight thing.
Right.
And if you want to have a native Lambda for efficiency, then you still want to use the Lambda syntax, but you don't want the bytecode that gets generated to have closures in it. You want to have the same stuff that Java 8 would produce.
So that's subtle, but that's a hard problem. So you'll have to decide how you're going to handle that.
That's one of the things. That's again one of the reasons why 3 is not out yet, because we're finalizing these sorts of issues.
But you also have method references now. In that's Groovy, we've always had the dot ampersand.
Correct. Yeah.
But you rarely see it. Or at least I rarely see it. I don't see people using it very much because it's so easy to write a closure. I mean, you can just write curly braces whereas in Java it's more complicated. But in Java, you get lots and lots of code that uses method reference syntax because that tends to be simpler than the corresponding Lambda.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's I can see why both are useful, and I can see why Java's certainly supported them. And now we've got that syntax as well.
Is that going to basically be converted to the dot ampersand approach, or is that the first idea and then you start tweaking?
It's converted to closure methods.
Oh, okay.
Which are the same thing as the ampersand, but it's not. So you've got to go through all the different cases of static and instance and whatever else, and they all map to something sensible. But whether we'd need to do anything different, we haven't decided for that one yet.
So those are two big things. Now also in Java 8, what the other things they added were default methods and interfaces and static methods and interfaces.
Yep.
And we're going to have that now too, presumably?
Default methods and interfaces, yes. I'll have to check on the static. I'm not sure whether we've got that
but eventually
finalized yet. Well, that's the goal, is to have that as well.
Yeah. I mean, the default methods
we were doing some experimentation. I just can't remember how far we got. So I'll have to double check.
Well, the default methods interfaces you mentioned, I think that use traits for that.
Correct. Yeah, we mapped that directly onto trait.
Which that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the basic capabilities of Java 8. I'm trying to think of anything else that would be in Java 8 that has not already supported in Groovy. I can't think of anything. So what else is coming in Groovy itself?
Yeah, because we've got the new parser there, there's a whole lot of little things that we've wanted for a while that we can slot in. So there's some new operators. There's not in,
yes.
Yeah, not instance of. There's an identity operator and not identical operator. So instead of calling is, so Groovy.
Yeah, right. Because I've always called the is method because the equals method or dot or equals delegated to, I shouldn't say delegated, but equals operator called the dot equals method.
Yeah, so Groovy hijacked the equals symbol in Java and said, look, 80% and 90% of the time, people are wanting to compare things, equality at the sort of domain
they
level.
want equivalence, right?
They don't want,
yeah, exactly.
And so let's make the 80% case have the nice, simple, pretty syntax.
Sure.
And sometimes you do want to compare identity. Let's make that one the ugly one that takes a bit more to
and now we have
now there's an operator for that as well. So
which is
triple equals,
equals,
or not equals.
Which makes it look like JavaScript again, and that's not an association you want. But I get it. I mean, that really makes it's perfectly appropriate.
We actually did have that as an operator in a very early version of Groovy, and
really
got rid of it because we didn't want to confuse people. If they're on a reading the code on their mobile phone and there's a equals or a triple equals, and they're getting slightly older eyes like mine, and they're reading it. Is that a identical? So we didn't want to confuse people, but I can just magnify.
So that's now the is method basically, and
you can still use is, but
and not equals is the opposite.
Just the opposite of that.
Okay, cute.
So that's nice.
Okay.
There's a Elvis assignment operator.
Right.
So if you remember the Java's got a ternary operator, and Groovy obviously supports that as well. And what the Elvis operator did was shrunk that down.
Right.
So basically, if one side of that was null, or
if it satisfied the Groovy
truth,
then
you'd get the value if it did satisfy. Otherwise, you get a default, basically. So one of the use cases where you use that is you'd say some variable equals the variable Elvis operator, some default.
Right.
Yeah. And so then if you've already gone and set the variable up, then you get it. Otherwise, you get the default. Now you can do a
question mark equals.
Question mark equals, and it'll do all that in even shorter. So we've shrunk the shrunken.
Which really needs a name. I don't know what it's going to be. I mean, we just call it Elvis assignment, but we'll see if somebody comes up with something clever on that. Okay, so that's coming too.
Yep.
Okay.
And safe indexing is another one that's nice. So the safe navigation operator lets you do a question mark in front of your dot.
Right.
And then if you're the thing on the left-hand side, your receiver is null, then the whole expression becomes null. But that never worked for if I'm looking up I want to look up. If I'm looking up an array and wanting to pull an index out or a map and trying to get the value for a particular key, then I had to manually test is the key null, or is the map null, or is the
because you were always allowed to put null keys in a map, which has really caused all raft of problems.
It's more the case if the map is null.
The map is null. So that's what this.
Or if I'm trying to get the fourth element out of a list and the list is null.
Oh.
So there was no way to have a shorthand for that. You can't question mark anything. So now you can put a question mark in front of your
square brackets,
and it'll say, well, if I'm trying to get the fourth element of the null list and I've got the safe index there, it'll become null.
So you're calling that safe index because you're doing it on the index. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Very.
And similarly, if I'm trying to get a term out of a map and the map is null, then we're just that gets coalesced to null. In terms of your typing. Yeah. Another thing that Java, I think 7 introduced was the ARM syntax.
The try with resources.
Automatic resource management.
Is that what it was called? I never knew it had a name. Okay, I always just called it try with resources.
Yeah, so it's automatic resource management.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure
it meant you didn't have to write a finally block, but your object had to implement auto closable for this to work.
And so there was a special syntax where you include the things that you want to be auto closed in round brackets and so on and so forth.
In front of the try block.
Yeah. So Groovy's got usually a much nicer way to handle these things. It's got special things that deal with exactly this scenario.
Yeah.
So usually there's a more compact way to do it in native Groovy land. So it was kind of a feature that there was no burning urge to satisfy. But again, in the interest of cut and paste from Java, and it's going to work.
Yeah, right.
It's supported as well. So if you like the ARM syntax, you can support that, or there'll probably be a more compact syntax you can also use.
So in other words, it'll be supported but not idiomatic.
Yeah, I can't think of any scenario where you'd prefer that over Groovy's style. Maybe when you're doing type checking, maybe I haven't thought it through, but there might be some scenarios where you get a little bit of value add from putting in that extra noise. But
I mean, Groovy always had
probably infer most things. But.
Like when you're dealing with data in a file, Groovy always had an automatic way to close the file. You did a with method or something like that.
Yeah. With stream,
with
right? Reader,
exactly, and with reader, right, and that took care of closing it automatically. But that was instead of the try with resources, and now we have the try with resources.
So you can do both.
Okay.
So I don't know whether there might be a small number of scenarios if you've got compile static on or type checking on where you might get some benefit, but I can't think of one right now. But,
okay.
But yeah,
certainly.
Some other little ones as well that people, again, probably a little bit obscure, but if you're cutting and pasting it, you might get there. One of them is nested blocks. So in Java, I can just, anywhere I want, I can just open a new block and have code inside it. And then inside that block, I can put another nested block.
It's just like, wow.
And it's equivalent to getting rid of all the blocks, except you've got different scoping mechanisms inside each one.
Right.
So inside one block, I could define a variable X, and increment it or whatever I want to do, and then in the next block along, I can also define a variable X, and it could be a different type and use it and whatever else.
It's job security or whatever. You're making it so that nobody can maintain your code but you or whatever. I mean,
perhaps
what a mess.
Obfuscating or some sort of kind.
But it is
well, legal. And there are kind of obscure cases that you see every now and then. You say, I kind of get why they did it here and what have you. But again, very rare. But if you want it, we've got that ticked off as well, just to support everything. So interface default methods. We've talked about that one. This is the things that I was starting to talk about before a little bit early. The comments in your Groovy source code are now captured and embedded in the metadata. So if you're writing an AST transform or back at that level, all that stuff's there. You can look inside.
Okay. And
so what I can do is whenever I see some Java comments, I could look inside that and say, hey, is Ken the author of this method? If Ken's the author, I'm not going to compile it up.
Yeah, right. No, you wouldn't want to
Whereas
do that.
if Jeff is the author, then we'll compile that one up and it'll be fine. So if you wanted to, that information's there. And
so it's adding the comments to the AST.
That's right.
Syntax tree. Okay.
Yeah. And what that'll allow us to rejig our tooling, our Groovy doc tooling and other stuff like that to be quite a bit smarter.
Okay.
And as well as that, there's a way to actually embed the documentation into the class file itself.
Well, that should help the IDE people.
So if you look at some other languages in the Python world and places like that, they have.
Oh, is that how they do it?
They frequently do that rather than having the sort of separate Java doc page that you go and visit. It's embedded in there, and then when you're inside your Ruby IDE or whatever, you can say, or from the language, you can just say, show me the help for this class that I'm using, So you'll have that as an option. Again, you don't necessarily want to. Maybe you want to have classes in minimum compact form for your mobile phones or whatever. You might not include your voluminous documentation that we all write all the time.
The world has really changed, hasn't it? That even bringing that up as an option anymore, except we all do that now.
Yeah.
So so we got the Groovy doc embedded. Anything else?
The only other thing that I think is worth mentioning is some annotations can be in more places. Again, this is part catch up to Groovy, but it opens up some really interesting possibilities for this part catch up to Java, but it opens up some interesting possibilities for Groovy that aren't available to you in Java. So I'm not sure if anyone will have seen it, but one of the things and you can do this in Java 8, has most of what I'm going to be talking about in it. So you can declare something to be like a non-null whatever, but that non-null can now appear like on a generics type.
Oh, right. You showed that. That looks so bizarre. That actually inside the angle brackets where you're declaring the type, you put an @ null in front of it.
Yeah, or I can say, is this variable D an instance of a read-only date and things like that. So there's more places where you can put annotations now from a language point of view. And Java opened it up a little while ago. I think in 8 and maybe 9 might have extended it. I'll have to go back and check. But now we've done that as well. And we've got some of it even got into 2.4. There's more of it in 2.5 and more of it will be in 2.6. The new parser actually gave us the freedom to put it in all the places that we want it. And that's in there and mostly turned on. But the nice thing in the Groovy world is it's going to be all of that's going to be available to your macros and to your AST transforms. So you can do, if you think of a Grails scenario or whatever, and you want to do validation of your data,
there's
now more powerful ways to get all the things you might want spelt out in various forms in a declarative way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now, one thing you were telling me, because I had to ask, I always collect the history of these things, is I was wondering why in the world it was called Parrot,
Yep.
And there's a story with that, right?
Yes. So the new parser actually started off as a little Google Summer of Code project.
Right.
So we were all busy getting out probably 2.2 or whatever it was at the time. We were all heads down, getting this stuff out, adding new features, whatever it was. And we've been wanting to do a new parser for ages. Antler 2.7, I think, has kind of not been touched for like 5 years almost by the authors. And let's get on to Antler 3, and we never got around to it. And then Antler 4 came out, and we thought, oh, this is getting embarrassing. We're starting to fall behind. Let's get a student or someone looking at this, because we're kind of all busy. And the student started it and started making progress. And they say, yeah, I've got Antler 4 working. What's my requirement? What am I supposed to be doing for this project? And we said, we want you to build a parrot. So what it should be doing is echoing everything. So we want you to feed some Groovy source code into the old parser and the news parser. And the output of the new parser better be an exact echo of the output of the old parser. And that's all you need to do. Once you do that, your job's finished.
Really?
Once you've built the parrot, you're done. That's your project done.
And then that's how the whole thing started.
That's how it all started. And so we did that, and initially they did exactly that, but it only worked on a subset of Groovy.
Okay.
And then they started fleshing it out, and then we had some other people work on it and fleshed it out some more until we had full subsets. So they went and fed in all of Grails, all of Spock, all of Gradle, all of Jed, all of think of your favorite project, Ratpack, whatever. They fed the whole Groovy source code, all the big chunks of Groovy source code from all these projects.
We should mention Griffin too, because otherwise Andre Salmigray won't be happy with it.
I'm sure they would have fed Griffin.
Assuming he listens, I don't know. But okay, so that too. So that's where Daniel's son has spent a lot of time.
Yeah, well, he came on the scene just as we got it to the point where, he might have helped finishing that off. I can't remember the exact history, but that's when he came on the scene. He's just gone leaps and bounds in terms of actually. So at that point, we've got spitting out an AST that's identical, but it's still not plumbed in. Right. So we've now just got an Antler 4 parser just sitting there in the wild that can produce AST, but it's not plugged into anything.
Okay.
And so Daniel came along, plugged it all into everything, has added most of the enhancements that we've just talked about.
Right.
Went tweaked it all, improved it.
I see things on Twitter like, okay, you can do not in now, that sort of thing. So, okay, so that is all going to be bundled into 3.0, okay, which again is going to be out sometime next year.
That's the plan.
Presumably.
That's the plan.
We don't know when, and between 3.0 and 2.5 or whatever, that's the future for the user community. And I'm sure we'll want to talk to you again when, probably both of these will be out by the time we hit next year's conference, Yeah,
we'll have 3 might not be out, but we'll have the release candidates. And
then we'll be able to see what decisions were made.
It'll be feature complete, and there'll be some stuff would have been pushed off to 3 point whatever.
Yeah, right.
I'll tell you what made the cut, what didn't.
So just one global thing. These days you are spending at least half time, right, working for OCI?
Yes.
So I assume they keep you busy with groovy things that are related to Grails somehow, or at least Grails is a priority in there somewhere.
They give me a lot of freedom to do whatever's best for Groovy to some extent, but obviously Grails is one of the big users of Groovy, so it makes sense that I'm spending a bit of time making sure that Grails doesn't break when we go and add all these bells and whistles into the language. You'd hope that the big frameworks like Grails, like Spark, don't break when we go and do these things. So it makes sense to be looking. So
they've been good to you. You're happy there. Things are working out. That's good to know.
It's great to have their support.
I mean, this is your chance to trash your employer in front of a whole audience here.
No, not at all.
No, probably not a good thing. Now, right? Come right down to it, right?
No. I mean, if you look at, if you look at where their heart is, they've been in open source the whole time, and this is the exact area that they know that with these kind of technologies, they can help their customers do productive work.
And they've been a major presence at this conference,
At all the Groovy conferences.
Yeah, at all the
for
Groovy
quite a while now. So.
I think there'll even be a Rich Webb next week and several
yeah.
others. So that's been very helpful to all of us.
Yeah, for sure.
That's good. Anything else you wanted to mention or bring up or what have you? How are things down under?
Things are good. Things are good. We don't have your politicians. We've got our own politicians that we've grown and moan about.
Yeah.
Our own sporting catastrophes and teams that win and all the rest. So we're all having fun. And
someday I'd love to come down and visit there. It's just you'd have to spend a lot of time because they say you don't really know jet lag till you cross the international date line. And I've been to India, but even that's not as far away as Oz. So that'd be quite a trip down there.
Yep.
So when are you headed home?
Tomorrow night. So straight after the last session, I'm just straight to the airport.
And where do you go through?
I go from here to LA to Brisbane. So it's not too bad.
LA to Brisbane, holy mackerel. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your being with us this time. I always look forward to talking to you. I'm really glad you were able to come up here for this one.
Yep.
And good luck with all the changes and the commits that are happening.
Thanks very much, Ken.
Talk to you soon.
Glad for all your efforts that you put in keeping the podcast going and
such as it is.
And so on. So thanks very much.
Hey, thank you. Let me hit